Hello friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink with the new July 2021 distress color, which is Prize Ribbon. I was able to receive this early from Simon Says Stamp. So excited. So excited. I'll have the links, all the things. Tim Holtz will have his live video probably going alongside this one. There will be a replay later on YouTube as well. So I did some simple swatching with the Distress Oxide and the Distress inks just to show the difference, and also it helped me too. So this first one I did Blueprint Sketch, Prize Ribbon, and Chip Sapphire. So you can see the difference. I kind of thought it was a mix between those two, and it's not. And then this second swatch is Salty Ocean, Prize Ribbon, and Faded Jeans. So it's a very unique blue in the Distress line. I would call this almost like a soft navy sort of a color. So this is the Oxides. So we've got Blueprint Sketch on the left, Prize Ribbon in the middle, Chip Sapphire on the right. Chip Sapphire has that purple undertone to it. This one again, Salty Ocean, Prize Ribbon, Faded Jeans. I'm really excited. Obviously I'm doing this ahead of time, so I'm really excited to see Tim's video and see the comparisons and all the makes and fun things. So this is my little baby introduction, and then I'm going to, of course, make a card, which is this. So love it. Absolutely love it. So I started with some Canson XL watercolor paper, and I just trimmed this piece down that I had, so it's whatever size. It's a little bigger than A2 right now. And channeling my inner Debbie Hughes while making this. I've raved about her many times in a lot of my videos. Anything to do with like watercolor or like soft backgrounds, things like that. Very, very Debbie Hughes. And if you don't follow her, you should. Seriously. She also goes by Lime Doodle Design. Love it. So anywho, I have my watercolor paper. And then I have several Distress Oxide sprays. And you always want to shake them side to side, not up and down. Unless you like wrap the nozzle with some paper towel or a cloth, because it can ooze out the top. But you want to shake them really well side to side to mix up that pigment. So I've shaken them up. I've sprayed my watercolor paper just with water. And then I started with a bit of speckled egg and some rusty hinge. And then basically fiddling is what I'm doing. These sorts of backgrounds, I recommend doing them. They're, especially with the sprays, they just kind of do their own thing. And especially with the Oxide sprays, because there's those pigments in them, the pigments like to move and do different things. Also, if you hear sighing in the background, my dog Bo is laying on his bed in my office, and he's very sad that I'm not giving him all the attention. So anyway, I'm just kind of going back and forth. Like I did a bit of spraying, pressing off a little bit, drying a little bit in between the layers, but I'm kind of keeping it soft. I don't want a lot going on because this is just going to be my background because I want the florals I'm going to do to like be center stage. So I added a few splatters with this Prize Ribbon Oxide spray. And then same thing, sprayed it with water, let things move, just kind of experimenting. So once I was kind of happy with where everything was going, I'm going to completely dry this background and clean up the mess on my work surface. So dab off some of the excess with the water sprays. It also kind of reactivates things too. So you get all that texture and different colors and just fun. So once I was happy with it, I let it completely dry because I want to stencil over this. So I have Simon Says Stamp's Boho Circle Stencil. There's two of these, by the way. I've done both in videos. There's this one. This is the Boho Circle. And then there's the Spring Boho Circle. They're similar, but different. And I have both and love both. So this was the one I just decided to grab first this time. So I've done, like I said, I've done videos with both of them. But all I did was just lay the stencil on this background. Didn't bother taping it, and I'm not doing this evenly because I want that texture in the pattern, and I'm just using some crackle paste. Apply it over the stencil, and then I'm just going to set that aside, let it dry. I immediately washed off my stencil and my palette knife. Quick and easy. Everything's good to go. So the background is now drying, and while that's drying, I took that other piece of the Canson watercolor paper, put it in my Mini Misty, and I'm using images from Simon's Sweet Friend stamp set. This came out a few months ago, and I don't know why I didn't have it sitting front and center. This is a beautiful stamp set. Like, it's gorgeous. So anyway, watercolor paper in my mini Misty. I use my anti-static powder tool, brushed off the excess, and then I'm inking up the stamps with VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, and then pressing down really, really well because I'm stamping onto a textured surface. And I'm going to ink up these stamps and stamp it a second time. On camera it looks fine, but in real life I could tell areas weren't fully stamped, again, because of the texture. Hence the beauty of having a Misty. So I inked up the stamps a second time, stamped it right on top there a second time. And as always, you could just stamp and then watercolor. It's fine. Like, this VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink is great with watercoloring. It's not going to smear, anything like that. But I'm going to heat emboss. 1, habit. 2, I like the raised edge. 3, prevents me from smearing. Like, it won't smear necessarily with watercolor, but because it's a slower drying ink, there's a higher chance of me like rubbing my hands on it, or, you know, that's just what happens. So I'm heat embossing it with Wow's Clear Matte Dull embossing powder. You could use regular clear, it's fine. I like the Clear Matte Dull because it gives me that raised edge, but it's not shiny at all. So it just depends on my mood. You know, there's no full rhyme or reason. I do like, though, that I get that raised look or raised edge to protect, you know, me from making a big mess, but it doesn't have that shiny look of embossing, if that makes sense. So now I'm going to watercolor with my Oxide sprays. I've done a bunch of videos on my channel doing this. I love water, like any distress product, like the inks, the oxides, the sprays, the Oxide sprays, etc., the refills. I've used all of it in many different ways, but one of my favorite things to use is watercolor with them, and especially with the Oxide sprays. I think just because they're already in a liquid consistency, I just have a lot of fun with it. So all I do is shake up the bottle, I pull out the nozzle and just tap it onto my little plastic palette. That's it. I use those little tiny dots. That's all I need. They will separate on the palette. People have asked me about this. The longer they sit, the pigments will settle to the bottom of these little baby drops. That's fine because I swirl it up with my brush. Not a big deal. And even if they dry on the palette, you can still re-wet it and rework it later on if you want. Just fine. So I've got all my drops. I went with blue roses because I wanted to use this prize ribbon color. And again, honestly, and I've said this, disclaimer, like, one, yes, this color was sent to me. So were the other ones. I would have purchased them anyway. And it doesn't matter. Whatever new distress color Tim releases, I'm like, I love it. Like, I've said this every time. He could release like baby poop brown and we'd be like, this is the best shade of brown ever. So just take it all with a grain of salt. This color is beautiful though. Genuinely. I love it. I love all the distress colors and I love playing with them. So I did my coloring of the roses with this blue. Got it wet first with just clean water and then just dropped in the color and let it sort of do its thing. I did add a tiny bit, not a lot, because I didn't want to like really mix the colors, but I added a tiny bit of speckled egg just to kind of some of the edges of a few of the petals. But again, barely any because I really wanted just this blue, you know, to stand out. So after I did the roses, my little bumblebee, which I had never even noticed before was in the set. He's so cute. I love bumblebees. But anyway, I used fossilized amber for his body and then the teeniest bit of that speckled egg for the wings. And then for all the greenery, I'm using my go-to sort of favorite green combo, which is Twisted Citron and Rustic Wilderness. I've raved about this combo before. I love it. There's something about these two vastly different greens. The way they kind of mix together, I love it, especially with the oxides, because again, those pigments in the oxides just kind of have a life and mind of their own, and they just move around and do their things. And with these greens, it gives me a lot of like depth and dimension with literal no effort, because you just slap down the Twisted Citron, drop in a bit of the Rustic Wilderness, and then let it do its thing. So I did that with all the greenery and then painted that little bud with the prize ribbon. And usually I would just leave it like it's fine as is. But the more I was looking at it, I was like, ooh, I want to go in and add more of that prize ribbon blue to just intensify these large florals just 'cause, you know. So I went back in. So everything by this point is mostly dry. So I went back in with that blue and just added darker areas with my paintbrush, and then just kind of move it around and then let it completely dry. So I did the same thing with the greens a little bit, just added a bit more to intensify it, and then went in and added that blue, also because there was more of it sitting on my little palette here. So added it closer to the center, or the like inner edges of these petals. And again, simple, really, really simple. So went in, added that, and then I'm going to let these completely dry, which again doesn't take very long because I'm not adding a ton of liquid at this point. Also, it's really, really warm here. In fact, really warm. We're going through another heat wave up here. So the joys of crazy weather. But anyway, let everything dry, and then I'm going to add a little bit of splatter. Not a ton, but I couldn't not add splatter. So I have my little porcelain palette here, and this actually has some white gouache and actually a little bit of perfect pearl powder still in there. And same thing, it just reactivates with water. So I just swirl a clean wet paintbrush in there, and then I just lightly splatter on this. Not a ton, but just a little bit, just to get that texture that I like. So once that's splattered, let these completely dry again. Want to make sure everything is dry so that I can use the coordinating wafer dies to die cut everything. So everything is dry. I'm going to tape the coordinating wafer dies into place with my Spellbinders tape so that these dies don't move when I run them through my die cut machine. So get everything taped into place. I'm going to run these through my die cut machine so everything is die cut. Once they are die cut, I started kind of like assembling them on my work surface just to kind of give me a visual idea of what I'm going to do on my card front. So, and also because I was just having fun playing with them. So gave myself a good idea, and I was like, okay, I know what I'm doing now. So my background is completely dry. Like that crackle paste is dry. So I'm going to trim this down to a little bit smaller than what my A2 card front will be. So this panel ends up being roughly like 4 by 5¼ inches. And then lay out my flowers on here to kind of figure out where I'm going to adhere everything. And then once I'm kind of happy with that, I'm going to start adhering everything with some thin 3D foam squares. And that sentiment there is from that same stamp set. I just heat embossed that onto a piece of black cardstock with Simon's cream embossing powder. I heat embossed it onto the black cardstock and then trimmed it down. And then, yeah, going to adhere everything with just some thin 3D foam squares. Anything with like a texture paste, like this crackle texture paste or just texture paste, glitter paste, etc. You want to use either a really strong liquid adhesive or something like these foam squares, foam tape, etc. if you're adhering on top of it, because you're adhering something to a very uneven surface. So getting like good strong, like you don't want to use like a tape runner or anything like that. You want to use something really strong that can like kind of fit in those nooks and crannies of crackle paste, texture paste, etc. So I've got everything adhered. For my sentiment, I just trimmed down some of the scraps of black cardstock and just added a couple layers behind the sentiment because I wanted to pop it up, but I didn't want it to be super bulky. So added a couple of those layers behind it and then just one more little foam square. And then I'm going to adhere that onto the card front as well. And then for my card base, I pulled out some Dina Desert Storm cardstock. And this was cut to 4¼ by 11. So I'm scoring it at 5½. So this will be a top folding A2 card. And I've got that Boho circle stencil again that's been cleaned off. And I'm just taping it into place on the inside of this card. And I'm going to use that new Prize Ribbon Distress Oxide ink on the inside. And I'm using one of Ranger's new mini domed blending foams. I've just started experimenting with these. I mentioned this in like my last video or the video before, depending on how much I get posted. Yeah, I purchased enough for all the colors and I've finally started using them. So having fun with them. But anyway, blended that on top. And again, this color on Desert Storm just, but really all the Distress Oxides on Desert Storm or Craft cardstock just make me happy. There's just something about that combo and I love it. So anyway, I put the card base back inside my mini Misty and I just stamped another sentiment from the set with the VersaFine Claire Nocturne ink. And then to adhere the card front to the card base, I have scraps of some just heavyweight white cardstock. I have a bunch of like cardstock in my stash that I don't like. People keep asking me like, what's the brand? Like name and shame. One of them is Recollections by Michaels. But anyway, I'm not a fan of it. I don't like how ink sits on it. I don't like that it's crooked most of the time, that I spend more time fighting with it than using it, so I don't use it. But it's great for layering things like this. So rather than use foam tape, I'm using up the cardstock I don't like. So I use those to layer and adhere my card front to my card base. And then I'm going to add a little bit of bling, as one does. So I've got some sparkling sapphire rhinestones from Trinity Stamps. Those went very nicely with this blue. So I adhered just a few of those into place. And then I actually pulled out again, because I was channeling Debbie Hughes, because I see her doing this, and it always reminds me, I'm like, oh yeah, I have like a bajillion bottles of Nouveau drops. So I'm going to add some Frosted Lake Dream Drops and Gold Luxe Dream Drops. These ones are, all the Dream Drops by Nouveau are gorgeous. They're iridescent and shimmery and will look different depending on the color cardstock, like whether it's light cardstock, dark cardstock, like, because they have those interference pigments in them, and they're just beautiful. So I only added a few, not a ton, to these. The Gold Luxe went so well with that background, with that like rusty hinge spray. It just fabulous. So I applied a few of those. I tapped my card a few times. It just helps kind of smooth out the Nouveau drops, and flattens them a little bit, smooths them out a little bit, and then I'll just let them dry. And this card is complete. So I will have a link to all the supplies. I will have a link to the new color. It's available individually as well as a bundle with a free pin from Simon Says Stamp. All that info. All the info, links, etc. that will be in the description box below the video, with a link to my blog post with all of it. You can check that out in the description box below the video if you are interested. Thank you all so much for watching, subscribing, thumbs upping, commenting. I very much appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.